My name is Cora, and I'm 29 years old. For most of my life, I believed my family was a quiet constellation, each of us a fixed point of light in a shared sky. It wasn't until my brother, Julian, became a supernova of success that I realized our orbits were never equal. While I found my purpose in the hushed, hallowed aisles of a community library, he was building an empire of renewable energy, casting a shadow so long it threatened to extinguish my small light entirely. Last spring, on a Sunday afternoon that smelled of freshly cut grass and impending rain, I stopped by my parents' house to return a borrowed book. I let myself in through the familiar side door, calling out a greeting that went unanswered. It was then, in the hallway that held the ghosts of our childhood heights, marked in pencil on the doorframe, that I heard them. The low, serious murmur of voices from my father's study, my parents and Julian, discussing my life as if it were a line item on a balance sheet. The conversation I overheard didn't just break my heart, it fractured the very foundation of my world, revealing a truth so wounding I still feel its ache in my bones. Our childhood unfolded in the gentle, humid air of Beaufort Creek, a small city in North Carolina where history is etched into the cobblestone streets and live oaks drip with Spanish moss. Our home was a modest but sturdy brick ranch, its greatest feature a sprawling backyard that sloped down to a lazy, brown creek. Julian, older by 4 years, was my protector and my tormentor, my co-conspirator in summertime schemes and my rival for the last slice of my mother's peach cobbler. He was the sun, brilliant and bold. I was the moon, content to reflect his light. Our parents, Robert and Margaret, were products of their generation, valuing stability and tangible success above all else. Dad had been a financial advisor, a man who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, gains and losses. Mom was the architect of our domestic life, her love expressed through perfectly ironed shirts and a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. Their mantra, repeated at countless dinner tables, was simple: invest in what grows. From an early age, it was clear they believed Julian was the blue-chip stock. He excelled effortlessly. His science projects were legendary, his report cards were flawless, and his debate team victories were a source of immense pride for our father. I remember the weight of Dad's hand on Julian's shoulder, a gesture of approval so profound it felt like a coronation. "That's my boy," he'd say, his voice thick with a pride I craved like water. "He's going to change the world." I was different. My talents were quieter, less quantifiable. I wrote poems that my English teacher, Mrs. Finch, would read aloud to the class. I could spend hours lost in a book, the world outside fading to a distant hum. I was the one my friends came to with their secrets, my empathy a soft place for them to land. But these qualities didn't register on my parents' scale of achievement. "Cora, your head is always in the clouds," Mom would sigh, her words a gentle but persistent criticism. "Poetry is a nice hobby, but it won't pay the bills." I tried to fit their mold. I took advanced math, joined the student government, and pushed myself for A's where B's came more naturally. But it was never enough. When Julian was accepted into Duke's engineering program on a full scholarship, the celebration was a grand affair, with relatives driving in from 2 states. Dad's toast was a soaring tribute to Julian's limitless potential. For years later, when I was accepted into UNC's Library Science Master's program, we marked the occasion with a quiet dinner at home. A stable career, Dad had noted with a nod. Very sensible. The word sensible felt like a consolation prize. After graduation, our paths diverged dramatically. Julian co-founded a green energy startup, Greenspire, that developed innovative solar panel technology. He worked with a fierce, unwavering focus, and his efforts paid off. The company flourished, attracting investors and accolades. I, meanwhile, found my calling at the Beaufort Creek Public Library, a beautiful old building with soaring ceilings and the comforting scent of aging paper. My starting salary was modest, barely enough to cover the rent on my small, sunlit apartment and the significant monthly payments on my student loans. I never begrudged Julian his success. He had earned it. In the early years, he was still the brother I knew, calling to ask about my day, remembering the names of my eccentric library patrons. When his company started to take off, Family dinners began to shift. The conversation orbited around Julian's latest triumphs: a new round of funding, a feature in a business journal, a trip to Germany to meet with engineers. I would share stories from the library of helping a young girl discover her love for fantasy novels, or assisting an elderly gentleman with his family genealogy project. And my parents would listen with polite but fleeting interest before turning the conversation back to Julian. "Did you tell them about the new patent, son?" Dad would prompt, his eyes gleaming. The financial chasm between us widened. At 31, Julian bought a stunning historic home in the city's most prestigious neighborhood, a 3-story Charleston single house with double piazzas and a walled garden. His car was a sleek, silent electric sedan that cost more than my annual salary. Meanwhile, I drove a 10-year-old Civic and furnished my apartment with a curated collection of thrift store treasures and hand-me-downs. My student loan debt, a staggering $80,000, felt like a constant, heavy weight on my chest. I'd been told a trust fund from our grandparents was meant to cover our education, but when I'd inquired about it in college, my father had spoken vaguely of a market downturn that had diminished the funds. I had accepted his explanation without question, assuming the burden of the loans was simply my reality. Julian, to his credit, often offered to help. "Corey, just let me pay off those loans for you," he'd say during his visits to my apartment, his gaze taking in my mismatched furniture and DIY bookshelves. "It's no big deal for me, and it would change everything for you." His offer was kind, but my pride was a stubborn thing. "Thanks, Julian, but I need to do this myself," I'd always reply. I made my choices. What stung more than my own financial struggles was watching my parents' lives transform through Julian's wealth. He paid off their mortgage as a 50th anniversary present. He sent them on a luxury river cruise through Europe. Mom's kitchen was completely remodeled, a sleek, modern space with granite countertops and appliances that hummed with quiet efficiency. "You should come with us to Tuscany next fall," Mom would say over the phone. "Julian's renting a villa for the whole family." The invitation felt like a formality. They knew my librarian's salary and limited vacation days made such a trip impossible. I was becoming a spectator to my own family's life. Then came Isabel. Julian met her at a fundraiser for the local arts conservatory. She was a curator at a private gallery, elegant, intelligent, and from a family whose name was synonymous with old Beaufort Creek money. My parents were utterly captivated. "She's so poised, so accomplished," Mom would gush. "Her family has a home on Kiowa Island, you know." The unspoken contrast with my partner, Leo, was palpable. Leo was a potter, a kind, gentle soul with clay permanently under his fingernails and a laugh that could fill a room. He lived a simple, contented life in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, his wealth measured not in dollars, but in the beauty he created with his hands. When I introduced him to my parents, their reception was polite but cool. "He seems nice," was all Mom had said later, her tone laced with reservation. The engagement was announced at Christmas. Isabel's diamond ring, a classic emerald cut, sparkled in the light of the tree. "We're thinking of a fall wedding," she announced, her smile radiant. "Perhaps at the Biltmore or a vineyard in the mountains." Mom clasped her hands together, her eyes shining. "Oh, how wonderful. I've always dreamed of helping plan a truly beautiful wedding." Her unbridled enthusiasm was a sharp, painful jab. When I'd mentioned that Leo and I were getting serious, she had simply nodded and changed the subject. A few months later, the first major crack in our family's facade appeared. Julian called to announce he had bought a new commercial property for Greenspire's headquarters. That same week, I had been awarded the state's Librarian of the Year award for my work in community outreach. At Sunday dinner, the conversation was consumed by talk of zoning laws, construction timelines, and commercial real estate. When I finally found a lull to mention my award, Dad glanced up from his plate. "Oh, that's nice, honey," he said, before turning back to Julian. "Now, about the tax implications of that purchase." The casual dismissal stung more than any overt criticism. Later that evening, as I helped Mom clear the table, I found the courage to speak. Did you realize you spent the entire dinner talking about Julian's building and didn't ask a single question about my award? Mom sighed, stacking plates with sharp, precise movements. Cora, don't be so sensitive. A multi-million-dollar real estate deal is a major accomplishment. And being named the best librarian in the state isn't? My voice trembled. Dad walked in from the living room, drawn by our raised voices. Let's be realistic, Cora. Your brother is operating on a different level. It's not about loving him more, it's just acknowledging the scale of his achievements. The scale. I repeated, the words catching in my throat. You mean the financial scale? That's the only one that matters to you, isn't it? I think you're just jealous, Mom said, her voice turning cold. We raised you to be better than that. I drove home that night with hot tears blurring the streetlights, the comfortable illusion of our family's love shattered into a million sharp-edged pieces. The engagement party was held at a private club downtown, a place of dark wood, old oil paintings, and hushed reverence for wealth. I wore the nicest dress I owned, a simple silk sheath in a deep forest green, and still felt like a child playing dress-up. I found a quiet corner near the French doors overlooking the garden, feeling adrift in a sea of bespoke suits and designer labels. There's my favorite sister, Julian said, appearing at my side with 2 glasses of champagne. I'm your only sister, I replied, our old joke a small, familiar comfort. Corey, he said, his expression turning serious. Isabel and I were talking. We really want you to be the maid of honor. The sincerity in his voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. In this gilded cage, surrounded by strangers, my brother was still my brother. He still saw me. Really? I asked, surprised. I'd be honored, Julian. My honor, however, soon felt like a very expensive burden. The first formal wedding planning meeting took place a few weeks later in a private room at one of the city's finest restaurants. Isabel's parents, the formidable Dr. and Mrs. Sinclair, were there, as were my own, all of us seated around a large mahogany table. We've settled on a venue, Isabel announced, opening a pristine white binder. The Black Walnut Inn in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We'll reserve the entire estate for the weekend to ensure privacy. I did a quick mental search. The Black Walnut Inn was notoriously exclusive, a place where presidents and celebrities went to escape. A sleek, professional wedding planner named Eleanor presented a preliminary budget. I caught a glimpse of the total, a figure well over $250,000, before the tablet was passed to my father. Now, for the bridal party, Isabel continued, her tone bright. I've fallen in love with these gowns by a designer in New York. They're hand-beaded silk. She slid a photo across the table. The dress was undeniably beautiful. They're a bit of an indulgence, around $4,000, but Julian and I would be thrilled to cover half as our gift to you girls. $2,000. My stomach twisted. That was 3 months' rent. And for the bachelorette weekend, one of Isabel's bridesmaids chimed in, we're thinking a long weekend in Napa. Wine tasting, spa treatments. It will be fabulous. My mind raced, adding up the costs, the dress, the shoes, the alterations, the hair and makeup, the flights to California, the accommodations, the gift. The number was dizzying, terrifying. It represented my entire savings, the small emergency fund I had painstakingly built over 5 years. Cora, you've gone quite pale, my mother observed from across the table. Are you feeling all right? Fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just a bit overwhelmed by all this excitement. After the meeting, I managed to pull Julian aside near the valet stand. Julian, this wedding is going to be incredible, I started, choosing my words carefully. But I need to be honest. The costs, they're just not feasible for me. The dress alone is more than I can responsibly spend. Julian's face fell. Corey, I'm so sorry. I didn't even think. Just let me cover it. All of it. No, I said, my pride flaring again. I don't want to be a charity case. I need to figure out if I can even afford to do this. He promised to talk to Isabel to see if they could find a more affordable dress option. But when he brought it up with her later, she was politely resistant. But I have my heart set on this vision, she'd said, her voice full of gentle disappointment. It wouldn't be the same. My parents, who had contributed a significant sum to the wedding, never once offered to help me. Their silence was its own message. This was my problem to solve. My inability to keep up was my own failing. I spent the next few months in a state of quiet panic. I took on extra evening shifts at the library's reference desk. I started a side business creating custom research bibliographies for college students. I stopped going out with friends, I packed my lunch every day, and I watched my small savings account dwindle as I paid the deposit for the dress and booked a non-refundable flight to Napa. The joy of being asked to stand by my brother was being systematically crushed under the weight of financial anxiety. One Sunday, I decided to drive to my parents' house to drop off the measurements for my bridesmaid dress, which were now overdue. Mom had texted me 3 times about it. As I pulled into their driveway, I saw Julian's car parked out front. I used my old key to let myself in, calling out a hello as I stepped into the foyer. The house was quiet except for the low murmur of voices coming from my father's study. I walked down the hall, intending to announce my arrival, but stopped dead when I heard my name. "She's dragging her feet on everything," my mother's voice said, sharp with annoyance. "The dress, the bachelorette party contribution. It's embarrassing." I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "I'm worried about her, Mom," Julian said. His voice was laced with a familiar, genuine concern. "This is a lot of financial pressure. I know she's still paying off her student loans." "Nonsense," my father's voice cut in, crisp and authoritative. "It's a lesson in fiscal responsibility. She chose that career with its financial limitations. She needs to learn to live within her means or make sacrifices." Then, my mother said the words that would echo in my mind for months. "Frankly, Robert is right. We need to let her feel the pinch. It's for her own good. It builds character." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. "But we helped me so much," Julian protested. "My first car, the down payment on my first condo, my student loans." "That was different, son," my father explained patiently, as if to a child. "That was an investment. We saw your potential. We knew there would be a significant return." There was a pause, and then Julian asked the question that changed everything. "What about her trust fund from Grandma and Grandpa? I always assumed that's what paid for her master's degree." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Dad cleared his throat. A long, uncomfortable silence hung in the air. "Well," he finally said, his voice lower. "At the time, you had that seed funding opportunity for Greenspire. We made a strategic decision to redirect Cora's funds toward your initial investment round. It had a much higher probability of a substantial return." The world tilted on its axis. The air in the hallway grew thick and heavy, impossible to breathe. "Wait," Julian said, his voice strained with disbelief. "You're telling me you took Cora's education money and gave it to me? Does she know?" "What purpose would that serve?" my mother asked coolly. "It would only cause unnecessary drama." The story about the market downturn was simpler. "It works better for everyone. We've set aside $100,000 for your wedding, son," Dad said, his voice regaining its confident timbre, clearly eager to change the subject. "We want to make sure everything is perfect. The Sinclairs are accustomed to a certain standard, and we intend to meet it." I couldn't hear anymore. I backed away from the door, my movements stiff and robotic. I grabbed my purse from the entryway table and slipped out of the house, the click of the closing door sounding like a gunshot in the silent afternoon. I made it to my car before the first sob escaped, a raw, ragged sound torn from the deepest part of my soul. I drove away, tears streaming down my face, the familiar streets of my hometown suddenly alien and hostile. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it felt like a physical violation. It wasn't just about the money. It was the years of lies. It was the cold, calculated assessment of my worth. I was not the sensible, stable investment. I was the one who was simpler to lie to. I drove to Leo's cottage, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. He found me on his doorstep, weeping, unable to form coherent sentences. He held me on his worn, comfortable sofa as I finally managed to choke out the story, the ugly truth of it poisoning the air between us. "Corey," he said, his voice thick with a quiet fury on my behalf. "That's not family. That's a business transaction." He was right. For my parents, family wasn't a circle of unconditional love, it was a portfolio to be managed. And I was the underperforming asset they had long ago decided to write off. That night, curled in Leo's arms, I felt a grief so deep it seemed to have no bottom. I was mourning the loss of a family that, I now realized, had never really existed at all. For 2 weeks, I existed in a fog of grief. I went to work, mechanically stamping books and answering questions, my smile a fragile mask. I ignored the barrage of texts and voicemails from my family. Cora, honey, we're worried. Sis, call me. What's going on? The hypocrisy made me physically ill. How could they feign concern after I'd heard the truth of their disregard? Leo and my best friend, Sophie, formed a protective barrier around me. They brought me food, let me cry, and listened as I endlessly replayed the conversation, trying to make sense of the senseless. They see you as a reflection of them, Sophie said one evening, her eyes full of fierce loyalty. Your choices don't fit the image they want to project, so they devalue them. It's about their ego, Corey. It was never about you. Her words, and the sessions I started with a therapist named Dr. Lena Petrova, began to clear some of the fog. Dr. Petrova gave my experience a name, the golden child and the invisible child dynamic. It's not uncommon, she explained in her calm, soothing voice. The parents project their hopes and ambitions onto one child, the golden child, providing them with resources and praise. The other child's needs and accomplishments are often minimized because they don't serve the parent's narcissistic needs. Understanding the dynamic didn't erase the pain, but it began to shift it. The hurt was less about me being unlovable and more about my parents being incapable of a love that wasn't conditional. The question, Dr. Petrova said, was no longer, why did they do this, but what do I need to do for myself now? After 2 weeks of silence, I texted them. Just 3 of them, Mom, Dad, and Julian. We need to talk. Dinner tomorrow night. My treat. I chose a quiet, unpretentious bistro downtown, a neutral territory. I arrived early, taking a corner booth and ordering a glass of wine to steady my nerves. They arrived together, a united front. Cora, thank goodness, my mother began, reaching for my hand. I let her take it for a moment before gently pulling away. We've been so worried. You look so thin. I'm fine, I said, my voice even. I want to talk about what I overheard at your house 2 weeks ago. The color drained from my mother's face. My father's expression hardened. Julian just looked down at the table, his shoulders slumped. You heard? My father said, his voice low. I heard everything, I confirmed. I heard you talk about building my character by letting me feel the pinch. I heard you admit to taking my trust fund and giving it to Julian as seed money for his company. I heard you say it was simpler to lie to me about it. Now, Cora, you're taking things out of context, my father began, falling back on his boardroom tactics. What context, Dad? I challenged, my voice rising slightly. What context makes it okay to lie to your daughter for a decade about her own money? What context justifies a $100,000 wedding contribution while your other child is working 2 jobs to afford to even be in the wedding? We made a sound financial decision, he insisted. It was about maximizing a return on investment. The clinical phrase hung in the air between us. I am your daughter, I said, my voice cracking. Not an investment. Do you have any idea how it feels to learn that your parents gambled your future on your brother because they decided he was worth more? That is a gross oversimplification, my mother snapped, her eyes darting around the restaurant. We love you both. Do you? I asked, looking her straight in the eye. Your love for me feels like it comes with terms and conditions. Your love for Julian is a blank check. Julian finally looked up, his face etched with misery. She's right, he said quietly. It's not right. None of it is. Stay out of this, Julian, my father warned. Ignoring him, I locked my gaze on my parents. I have sacrificed my peace of mind and my financial security to be part of a wedding that I now understand is just another symbol of this family's messed up value system. I have been made to feel small and inadequate my entire life for not choosing a path that you deemed successful enough. I took a deep breath, the words I'd rehearsed coming out with a painful clarity. I cannot be your maid of honor. I can't stand up there and pretend. So I'm withdrawing. From the wedding, and from this dynamic. I need space. A lot of it. You're being hysterical, my mother hissed. Think of the optics. What will the Sinklers think? The optics, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. That's what you're worried about. Not that your daughter is telling you her heart is broken. That says everything. I stood up, my legs shaking but steady. I placed enough cash on the table to cover my meal. I need to go. I suggest you all use this time to think about what kind of family you actually want to be. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back, the weight of a lifetime of pretending finally lifting from my shoulders. The air outside felt cleaner, clearer. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I felt like it was mine to decide. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation. I blocked my parents' numbers, creating a silent space for myself to heal. Julian, however, found a way through. He sent a single, heartfelt email, which I read after a week of letting it sit in my inbox. He took full responsibility for his own passive complicity, for enjoying the benefits of their favoritism without questioning the cost to me. He ended it with a simple plea: please don't let their mistakes destroy what we have. You're still my sister. He showed up at my apartment a few days later. We talked for hours, more honestly than we ever had in our lives. He told me about the immense pressure he'd always felt to be the good investment, the fear of failure that drove him relentlessly. For the first time, I saw him not as the favored son, but as another victim of our parents' conditional love, just one who had been trapped in a gilded cage. I want you at my wedding, Corey, he said, his eyes welling with tears. But I want you there as my sister, not as a prop. I'll handle everything. The costs, the parents. I'll make sure you're protected. Please. I realized my anger wasn't truly with him. It was with our parents. Punishing Julian would only deepen the wound. So I agreed on my own terms. I would attend not as a bridesmaid, but as a guest. I would bring Leo. And I would have no direct, unmediated contact with our parents. Julian agreed without hesitation. He also did something I never expected. The next day, a wire transfer appeared in my bank account for the full amount of my original trust fund, adjusted for a decade of inflation. The memo line read simply, "What's yours is yours." I'm so sorry. I sat at my kitchen table and cried, but this time, the tears were of relief. I paid off my student loans in one lump sum. The feeling of that debt vanishing, of that monthly burden disappearing from my life, was an indescribable liberation. It was a freedom I had given myself by finally speaking the truth. I went to the wedding. It was as beautiful and opulent as I'd imagined. The Blue Ridge Mountains were a stunning backdrop of misty peaks and autumn foliage. I watched from a guest's chair as Julian and Isabel exchanged their vows. I saw my parents across the aisle, their faces a mixture of pride for their son and a new, uncertain sadness when they looked at me. During the reception, my father approached me, a glass of champagne in his hand. Your brother is a happy man, he said. Yes, he is, I replied, my voice neutral. He hesitated, swirling the bubbles in his glass. Cora, we handled things poorly. I see that now. When you're ready, I would like to try to talk. Properly. It wasn't the apology I craved, but it was a crack in the wall of his pride. It was a beginning. Maybe, Dad, I said. We'll see. The healing is slow. It's a delicate, ongoing process of rebuilding on a foundation of truth instead of pretense. I have dinner with my parents once a month now, always in a public place. I've learned to state my boundaries calmly and firmly. When my mother starts to compare my life to Julian's, I gently say, Mom, let's not do that. Tell me about your garden. Slowly, painstakingly, they are learning. The most profound change, however, has been within me. My sense of self-worth is no longer tied to their approval. I find it in the quiet satisfaction of my work, in the love I share with Leo, in the laughter of my friends, and in the simple, profound peace of my own life. Last week, my mother came to the library. It was the first time she'd ever visited me at work. She watched as I led a children's story hour, my voice animated as I told a tale of a brave little mouse. Afterward, as the children scattered, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not pride, exactly, but a kind of quiet awe. You're really good at this, she said. You create a kind of magic for them. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I know, I said. And for the first time, I knew with every fiber of my being that my magic was enough. My light, however small, was my own. And it was bright.